Hi there everyone, I'm coming at you today with an unscripted video for a change, so apologies if this gets a little more rambly than usual. But the other day I saw the news that the first of the Tyne and Wear Metrocars have been taken out of service and taken for scrap, essentially. And I got quite sad because, these trains have been around all my life and a lot longer. They've given us over 40 years of service on the metro, ferrying us all around our region. So while it's exciting to see new trains come in, it's, at the same time sad to see the trains that we're so used to and have come to love being taken to be broken up. And as a side note, I'm very glad that a number of them will be kept intact for whatever purposes, and we'll find out what those are in due course, I hope. But in a number of my videos here and there, I've touched on the different colours and liveries that the Metrocars have worn over the years, and essentially I wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive into that topic in this video. So for the purposes of our discussions now and essentially the way I think about it, I separated into three distinct eras of design over the past 40 odd years of the Metrocars. So starting with the initial livery that they came into service with, and then in the 90s the much more colourful version, and then today's sort of grey and black iconic one. Obviously in amongst those there have been sort of small variations and other one-off advertising or other liveries here and there, but for the purposes of our discussions today, it's just those three. So recently I put out a poll on my community tab asking you guys what you thought of each one and which one was your favorite, essentially. And the results surprised me for some reason that I can't quite explain. It was nice that over 100 of you voted. It sort of gave a pretty good sample size, and I suppose I expected the original livery to be slightly more popular, just because it's the original. It's the one that has the most sort of historical appeal, but yes, no real contest in terms of the vote, but interesting nonetheless. So essentially what I wanted to do was to just go into each one of these liveries and give my feelings on each one from a design point of view, and talk about why they may or may not have been successful or well liked or anything like that. And we're now moving on to the new trains with a new, much more yellow colour scheme, and I'm look forward to the various liveries that they'll have over the decades, just as the Metrocars have up to this point. So starting with the first livery from 1980, I think straight away you can see that they thought this was a no-brainer in terms of how they would do the trains, because this was the corporate livery of the Tyne and Wear Passenger Transport Executive. This was exactly the same colour scheme that all the buses had, and it essentially just was the transport livery. I think even some of the Pacer trains looked like this. So looking back at this from all those years, and when I was young, only 2 or 3 of the trains still had this sort of creamy white and yellow sort of two-tone thing going on. Looking back, it's smart. It's nice. The trains look good. You do wonder, sort of, with the white especially. It's going to look dirty quite quickly, but that was the livery that the executive had. So I think this looks good. It looks quite vintage somehow. Like, I know it was the 80s, but you feel as if it was a few decades earlier, even when you look at it. So yeah, I'm not touching on the interiors in terms of today, but it's nice. It's cohesive. The trains look good. The horizontal line just sort of implies motion slightly without doing anything too drastic. It keeps everything nice and simple. I think this is sort of a very classic design, just essentially nothing special. We're talking about the country's first light rail system here. Total pioneer, taking inspiration from continental Europe and bringing it over to England to revitalise a city in the post-industrial landscape. This is, the livery doesn't say any of that, and I sort of wonder if maybe it could have, because the metro is a very special, unique aspect of transport, and decorating it in the same way as you have every other type of transport definitely signals that you're looking at integration as they were at the time, but it does, to my eyes, minimize the metro slightly. You're setting everything up that it becomes the backbone of your transport system, and every other form of transport essentially feeds into it and tries to get people onto the metro. It's a higher order transport method, but you're not signalling that in terms of the design. So yes, if I was around in the late 70s and you were asking me, I would say give it a similar design language, sure, but do something slightly more unique with it. Taken by itself, as I said, it's smart, it's nice, but it doesn't stand out a huge amount, and it does look backwards instead of forwards, which might not have necessarily been the right decision for me. But speaking of which, when they refurbished the trains in the early to mid 90s and they overhauled the design, after you're talking after bus deregulation, the transport landscape looks completely different, and the metro is much more of a unique offering. It makes sense that they wanted to go a different route, and they certainly did. This is definitely the least popular era in terms of design, and I can definitely see why, even though it's the one I grew up with. So they took the trains and they gave them this sort of go faster lines and really bright colours, which is a big departure from the creamy white. And it's not as if they just dropped the design language for the rest of the system. They took the green, the red, the blue from the station lettering from the underground stations, which was part of the design language. It was recognisably metro still, but it was a lot. I think it was too much, honestly. I know they started with the red, and most of the trains were red, and I think by themselves each one of these trains in each colour looks okay. I mean, it does look very 90s just in terms of the sort of yellow triangle at the front, and I know initially the doors weren't yellow either, and they had to be made yellow to comply with this disability legislation, and I actually think they look better with the doors yellow. But each individual train looks okay. It's when you sort of have them all together that it just looks too messy. I said in a video I used to like playing a game with my dad where we'd predict what colour the train would be when it arrived. But it could be one of three, and it could be multiples. You get a blue train connected to a green train, or you get a green train coupled to a red train, and it just, it's much less cohesive, and it's much less impressive somehow, if you know what I mean. I think the blue is still my favourite. It just goes the best with the yellow to my eyes, in terms of just the colour pairing, and in terms of colour theory that makes sense because they're in different places on the colour wheel. But Green makes the most sense in terms of the network as it stood, because you had the yellow and green lines, but then, the red seemed to be what they started with, and, fine. It's almost like they lost confidence, in a sense, because if all the trains had been the same colour, I think this entire design era would have come across slightly better. So I personally would have gone with all of them being blue and yellow. But honestly, I would have been happy with any of the three colours just being chosen. So yeah, that's that design, the whole 90s thing. I have a lot of nostalgia for them, but in the poll they were definitely least popular, and I think most people look back on them and think it was A, very of its time, and B, just a bit of a misstep. So then we come to the 2010s and the final refurbishment of the Metros and the introduction of the current livery, which in the poll I called the grimdark one, because essentially it's Batman, isn't it? But they took the criticisms of all the bright colours, and they responded in kind by going, yes, black and grey, please. So again, I think that we all have a bias towards this because it is what the Metro has currently, but trying to look at it from a slightly more objective viewpoint, this is a really successful livery, I think. I remember in 2012, 2013 when they started to come in, it took me a while to be convinced of it, honestly, and I think a lot of that has to do with the design at the front. Once you're used to it, I think it's alright, but coming from the all yellow face of the previous livery, and you're coming to this one which has a more sort of definite pattern that isn't necessarily in line with the construction of the actual vehicle body. It did take a bit of time to get used to, and I have come around to it, and I do really like it, because it does sort of show off a more, not necessarily a silhouette, but a more convincing profile. But yes, overall I think this is a very smart and modern colour scheme. It looks great in motion. It changes depending on the level of light you're looking at it in. When the sun's shining brightly, it looks much more grey, but then when you're underground, it looks really dark, and the yellow stands out really, really well. So yes, this is essentially the best of the three for bringing out the yellow, which is obviously the most important, and it's a slightly paler yellow as well, which they must have workshopped to the ground, but definitely looks good. And interior aside, it's the most inviting. Essentially, it's the most reassuring. The train pulls in, and you're like, yes, this is a Metro system. I feel comfortable going home on this. Which I think definitely the RGB 90s ones didn't quite give off. And the way this livery is really successful is the way that Liverpool has completely copied it for their new 777 trains on Merseyrail, which is fine because ours is changing as well, and it's I guess it's a vote of confidence that this is just a good choice, and it integrates very well into the new design system in terms of the refurbished stations, both underground and on the surface. But it gels quite well with the older stations as well. This doesn't look out of place at Monument, and it doesn't look out of place at even the older stations where they've still got those red details in the fencing and whatever. It's sort of faded red. So yes, clearly successful, and the most popular in the poll as well. So I think it's clear that a lot of people like this, and I'm one of them. And yes, it took me a while to warm to it, but it means Metro to me now. It's sort of the one that catches your eye the most, which is odd because it's the darkest, but it essentially weathers the best as well. If a train is graffitied, or it's covered in mud or whatever, this is the livery that looks the best under all of that, because the brightly coloured ones just clashed with a lot of weathering and vandalism, and that white on a train is always just going to look awful when it gets rained on and when it gets mud on it. So yes, I guess that's my thought on on the current livery. But the point of this video is basically just to ask you, if whether you answered the poll or not, which one do you like? Let me know, because I'm really interested in hearing people's thoughts. Do you have specific memories tied to any specific colour schemes? Were you around for the original livery? Because I definitely wasn't. Basically, I would just really love to hear your thoughts, so please share them down below. And if you're not subscribed and you've made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. And I will be making lots of videos about the Metro, all the way through the new trains coming in and all sorts of other topics. So yeah, subscribe and stick around. And if you like this sort of way more conversational, unscripted video with a lot of rambling and ums and ahs and all of that, let me know, and I can make a few more videos like this. And I guess I'm stalling because I'm wondering if I forgot to say anything, but I don't think I did. So thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.